We're going to be looking at some walkthrough data that was completed about 2 weeks ago. And in this walkthrough data, I went around to about 12 classrooms and spent 20 to 30 minutes in each classroom, really to observe how technology was being used in the classroom so that I could better understand how to serve you. Nobody's names were attached to the walkthrough data. It wasn't a personal thing. It was really so that I could grow as a professional. It had nothing to do with you as a teacher, but really as me as instructional technology. How could I best serve what you need? And this is the biggest takeaway. One of the pieces of the walkthrough data had information on what technology was being used. And we see a lot of Chromebooks and the active board being used. And then we also see a good bit of no technology use at all. And I did note that pretty much all the lessons where technology wasn't being used, it was because technology wasn't needed for that part of the lesson. And several times it was a class discussion that was going on. Not necessarily where the teacher was doing all the talking, but actually the students were in part of that conversation. So it's not a one-sided teacher-centered conversation. It was very good instruction that didn't need technology. And 21st century teaching really has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with how you teach these students. It's very much a student-centered approach, and comes down to it that technology is only a small piece of it. So the agenda for today is to talk about technology use, and then also how do you monitor students when they're on their devices. So to start off this conversation with technology use, I want you to think about your education. Think about the things that your teachers used to teach you that was considered technology. So while you're thinking about this, think about your own classroom. Do you use the same tools that were used whenever you were educated? So depending on your age, you might say reel-to-reel. If you're not sure what that is, film strip, overhead projector, all the way up to now we have digital projectors, we have active boards, Chromebooks, laptops, computers. But even within my own experience, it varies from person to person, and depending on age, you might have a completely different set of technology that was used for your education. Technology changes so often. Really, by the time we get technology within the classroom, most of the time it's outdated, so it constantly has to be updated. You wouldn't dare use some of the same technology that was used 20 years ago in your classroom because it's not considered technology. So the way we teach sometimes has to incorporate these changing attitudes towards technology. Digital resources change often. That's why we can't get set in our ways to learn one type of digital resource and think that that's all we'll ever need to know. Your teaching has changed dramatically from when you were a beginning teacher. And it's because you got better. You got better because you adapted and you changed what you needed to change. And the best teachers are the ones that always keep learning new things. They don't get set doing the same thing over and over and over again. So to go off of that 30% of teachers weren't using technology in the classroom. So no technology doesn't mean that there's poor teaching. Just like this photo here. There is great teaching going on because the students are engaged in the content and listening to the teacher. They are interacting with the teacher. They have that relationship with the teacher. They're learning. There's no technology needed for this lesson because it's not really one of those things that's going to help the lesson out. Just using technology for technology's sake doesn't make it a great lesson. So on the next side of that, technology doesn't mean that it's going to be great teaching. If we look at this photo, the teacher actually seems a little bit disengaged from the students because all they're doing is accessing things online while he looks like he's checking his phone, checking his laptop. And I understand this is a snapshot of what's going on. I'm sure that there's more to this than what this picture tells, but it's proof that great teaching doesn't mean that it has to incorporate technology. Technology itself is just a tool. It's not something that was designed to be a standalone replacement for the teacher. Technology will never replace the teacher because how you use it is what's going to determine whether it's a good thing for the students or a bad thing. And we got to understand that the tool by itself can't be negative. It can't be bad. It's how you implement it within the classroom. So we have to constantly think about it. Am I implementing these things properly? Which leads us to this final thing, monitoring students while they're on their devices. So things change a little bit. You used to be able to give a student a worksheet, they could sit on the floor, sit in the corner, and you could see what they were doing most of the time. Now, you had students that would write notes, you had students that would try to hide, but you felt like you were more in control. My suggestion would be, please don't have students sit in the corner with their Chromebook. Please don't have them sit in places where it's hard to see their screen. That doesn't mean all your students have to be lined up where you can see all of them all the time, but just think about it. If it's a chore for you to see what they're doing, that means you're not going to be able to properly monitor, and you're also not going to be able to tell exactly what they're doing. You want to know exactly what they're doing. Please don't have them have any more than 3 or 4 tabs open at a time. So if you're doing an activity where it requires 3 or 4 tabs, that's fine. But if it's an activity where they should only have 1 tab open, they should only have 1 tab open. And I would be very strict about this. For one, the Chromebooks that the students use don't have enough RAM, memory, to process multiple tabs being open when we talk about 5 or 6 or 7 tabs. It slows down the device. So it makes it to where the educational content is harder to access. The other part, it becomes harder to monitor their student activity when they could be flipping back and forth in between all these different tabs doing inappropriate things. So limiting what tabs are open at a single time cuts down on that type of behavior. And if your thought is, well, I can't possibly do that, I can't tell, they're smarter than me. They're not as smart as you would give them credit for. It takes good monitoring and staying on top of it. It also takes accountability. When students fail to meet that standard, you have to be ready to take the device and come up with something different for them. It takes you doing that. The person monitoring really hasn't changed from paper and pencil to device, but we have to use good judgment when it comes to how we monitor student devices. So that pretty much sums up that whole monitoring of students. And then the last thing, digital resource sharing. I've set up a document so that you can share resources with your peers. Some of the best resources that you can get actually come from other teachers. The problem is you don't always believe me, and you don't always believe administrators. You don't always believe somebody from the outside. But this document is set up so that you can anonymously share resources that you're already using in your class and how you're using it. And the hope is that we'll all collaborate and be able to share these digital resources with each other so that we can start using them in the classroom. Because the biggest battle is finding the right digital resource that will fit your instruction. Because you don't always have the time to look through a list of resources and research it, figure out how it can be used, how to implement it. But this will be a good starting conversation, a good starting point for most teachers whenever they're looking for new resources. As always, if you have any questions about these digital resources, I'm always here. If you are looking for a specific resource, then let me know what you're looking for. I can do the research part and try to find you the best resource to fit your needs.